Bob van Bebber is my guest today on Future Cities Africa. He's director at Boogertman Partners and has an incredible list of personal achievements that I will link on the discussion below. For example, he was an overall winner of the 2019 South African Professional Services Awards for his individual dedication to architecture and contribution to South African business. Bob, welcome. I'll let you expand on your incredible background and career to date.
Thanks, Dan. Always difficult to talk about oneself. It's easier to let other people talk about you. I had the fortune to get involved in doing MTN's head offices in 14th Avenue, phases 1 and 2, so in total about 46,000 square meters. Effectively my first office block. After that, did some retail work, and then had the fortune of getting involved in the Soccer World Cup, and had the pleasure of getting involved in the Soccer City revamp, which effectively was a new build, although it's termed a revamp. Since then, I've done a fair amount of office blocks in Sandton for firstly Ernst & Young, EY now, in Sandton, for Worksmans, for Discovery, the new Discovery head office, and also the Mark, which is a mixed-use development, retail, and 2 office blocks for Edward Nathan Sonneberg's, and also for MMI Holdings. So that's, I suppose, those are probably the highlights of my career at Boogertman Partners. And certainly from a recognition point of view, the SAPSA Awards, the South African Professional Services Awards, whilst I got the overall, it was interesting to be pitted against lawyers and accountants and kind of the smart people that normally walk away with awards. They managed the overall award as well as, of course, the architectural award. So a huge highlight in one's career. But nonetheless, those are recognitions for past work. You're only as good as the last job that you do. So we're looking at new things in an environment that's exceptionally difficult for the entire construction industry. And we recognize that it's not just our industry that's in trouble, but all industries are. Obviously, we're focusing on how we keep our own doors open.
Moving on to some of these challenges, what, according to you, are 1 or 2 of the key challenges that firstly the architectural community is facing right now, and potentially how it can be overcome? And then looking further and looking into cities, key challenges that cities are facing at the moment and how they can be overcome.
Dan, I think the challenges for the architectural profession or the built environment profession is obviously that there's very little work out there. So one needs to kind of go scrounging and digging out the bits and pieces of work that there is. But also one needs to look at whether, working as a traditional architect or urban designer is exactly what you're going to continue doing in the future, and kind of branching out into doing related stuff, but slightly different. So we're opening our minds to think about what else can we do. So for example, either producing product or something like that, or that is required, not just produce product for the sake of it, but also to look at kind of research opportunities, and hence, which was something that happened before the lockdown, Boogertman Partners started FuturePart, which is an agency for kind of rigorous research and research back into practice, so that we're looking at things that we don't fully understand and documenting and finding insights that would feed back into practice, but also making that kind of information available to the broader community, students, universities, and also sharing that with our client base. So one needs to look at other opportunities of where one can find work. And use one's kind of design thinking skills to solve solutions that may not be traditional architecture or interior design. The challenges for cities, of course, is a completely different thing. Do we think cities will change significantly? Well, in many ways, we kind of hope that they will, but there's a strong possibility that we're also sick and tired of what we're currently going through, that we'd rather just get back to where we were before all of this happened. One hopes that there will be changes. There's definitely opportunity to apply pressure to change legislation, and to take advantage of a kind of environment that has fewer cars, fewer traveling, less traveling, more focus on local instead of the broader or the international, and worrying about one's own immediate neighborhood and not necessarily a neighborhood in another country. That said, we're an international practice, so we're obviously interested in what those kind of trends and opportunities are. But certainly densification in cities, we know that that's going to continue, and that's going to continue to put more and more pressure on the services, and particularly in African cities where infrastructure is under pressure, and we see that in our own backyard, where infrastructure is under pressure, access to good clean water, access to sewer, access to power, are all challenges that African cities will continue to battle with. And there's no easy solution to these things. Of course, in a densified environment, we're concerned about health, about how do we create better cities regarding our health, and of course, cities that are more inclusive and more connected. I like the idea of closing some streets so that we force some of the traffic out. I think there's particularly in our communities that it would be a good idea to do some street closures, but I mean street closures to keep the car out, not to prevent accessibility. So I would all of those kind of formal and informal street closures which lock communities and prevent other people from getting access, those must go. We need to create accessibility throughout, but street closures to get rid of cars, I think, is interesting. Or street closures to only allow public transport, I think, is something interesting. And when I say public transport, I absolutely include the entire taxi industry with all its good and bad things. The taxi industry is part of our reality and part of our accessibility solution. And they ain't going to go nowhere. And yes, there's some ministers think that they can legislate the taxi industry, but more importantly, we have to find ways to allow the taxi industry to thrive and provide more and more accessibility. It's an easy, low-hanging solution that solves a lot of our accessibility issues. So I'm quite tolerant of the taxi industry.
Okay. Do you know of the Open Streets initiative? I know it's Cape Town based. I don't know if they've moved into other areas, but that is pretty much what you've described with regards to closing the streets to cars and opening it up to food markets or walkways, etc.
Exactly, and that doesn't need to, thank you for raising that example, because it doesn't have to happen every day. But it happens when it works for the community, and I think we should try that more and more often. And I think I've read something about Kigali, for example, where they just close down, no cars, and everybody's out in the streets, and they just close the whole city down, and everybody's not only out in the streets enjoying the streets, but also cleaning up. It's one of the cleanest cities on the continent, and there's a lesson to be learned, because one of the issues around health and wellness, of course, is a clean city, and there is certainly a lot of work that we can do in cleaning up our cities. It was interesting during the lockdown to see cities with cleaners and high pressure hoses walking down the streets and the pavements and giving everything a good wash. And why wouldn't we do that on a more regular basis? And if we did it on a more regular basis, maybe we would have less of a health and hygiene issue, and maybe there would be more pride in the cities. So I think that I think that's also something that we need to solve. Clean up all those back alleys where people just toss stuff out the window. Let's find ways to solve those sorts of problems. It in my mind, seems like low-hanging fruit. So there's major challenges, and I don't think we're going to solve all of these things, and just because we've had a health pandemic. Certainly, it sharpens the thinking, and hopefully that we can put some pressure on getting legislation changed.
So, Bob, I'm going to give you a magic wand, and I'm going to tell you that if you can change one piece of legislation affecting the architectural community, what will that legislation be and why?
I imagine that probably what we should be fighting for is a legislation that forces the issues of sustainability and green building, which obviously is quite a nice big topic, because it deals with many issues like fresh air, like access to green spaces, like natural light, and things like that. Less reliance on fossil fuels. Using solar energy, again, natural ventilation. And of course, as we get more and more pressure on that sort of thing, then we would be creating better buildings. But we also need to be going back to the existing buildings, the existing building stock. In fact, we should be focusing more on the existing building stock than on the new build. The new build should be legislated without a doubt. But I think that we also need to find legislation to go back to older buildings and fix the issues that they have. But actually, some of the older buildings might actually be better off from a natural ventilation point of view, and an overshadowing, less use of glass, less reliance on expansive glass, which has obviously been a trend, and certainly we've contributed in some way. We hope positively and not too negatively from the use of glass in corporate offices. But I think there's a need for that sort of legislation, which will bring together a whole bunch of needs to solve the built environment.
So with COVID-19, no doubt it's impacted architecture, and it's shown how fragile our cities can be. You've mentioned that density in cities will carry on, it will increase. Do you see the rapid change of urbanization carrying on the pace that it has been carrying on? Or do you think there will be a slowdown and more people moving into the suburbs, as many companies are adopting a work from home strategy?
Yeah, so I think there will still be. I'm not clear on whether the rate of urbanization will continue, but I actually think it probably will. But the issue really is that people are in search of better opportunity and work, and that's what's driving, I think, most of it, and obviously access to better education and what have you. I think the impact of COVID has given us the opportunity to realize that a workforce that is not all centralized, but a decentralized working opportunity. And decentralization, obviously, we mean whether that's working from home or actually working from anywhere. So for the kind of multinationals or the corporates that have office space in various centers, that obviously allows people to work from a kind of decentralized point of view. You know, in a very simple way, if we all work from home for 1 day a week, that's in a straight line calculation, that's 20% less office space that we need, or potentially 20% more people that we could put into an office space. That said, our offices may need to be de-densified as well in the immediate to deal with the current concerns. But I think the opportunity to work from home has definitely given us a huge kind of wake-up call, and shown us that just by doing that, we can get less traffic on the roads, that we can still be efficient, that the business can still function. But what is happening, of course, is that, you know, there's consequences to everything that's happened, and businesses are going under. And that's because of lack of access, because you know the guy that was serving you lunch, or the coffee shop down the corner from your office block, is no longer getting the same feat, and is then, you know, struggling. So in some ways, there's a kind of like, it feels like there might have to be a sort of corporate responsibility to keep parts of our city going, I think parts of our cities are going to start falling apart because there's no trade. So how does one deal with that? You kind of want the best of both worlds. You want to be able to work from home because it's great, because it's easy to step out. You can go and take your dog for a walk at 11:45 in the morning if you feel like it, or at any time of the day. You can plan your life a little bit better, but at the same time, we also need to collaborate, and we can collaborate anywhere. So there's a kind of whole ecosystem of businesses that have been set up because of where we work. And now, if we're not at work, how do they survive? So it's not a simple answer. Obviously, that means that people are going to start repurposing what they do and reinventing what they do and what kind of services they offer. And we've seen a lot of that already. You know, the traditional restaurant has suddenly become the guy that sells bread and flowers and jam and what have you, when he wasn't able to operate as a fully fledged restaurant. And the next thing is going to be selling flour and sharing his recipes. What I do like about the opportunity, though, is that, you know, the kind of focus on local or focus on the immediate community is going to be more interesting. So I live in Parkhurst, for example, and it seems to me there's a massive opportunity that's staring Fourth Avenue in the face to say, well, let's not just be a road that's full of restaurants. Let's be a road that's got the little grocer and it's got the butchery, which it used to have, and serve more of the day-to-day needs of the community. And it's a street that's kind of ideally set up to do that. And it should, in many ways, kind of take this opportunity to reinvent itself. And I think there are many suburbs around, let's just talk about Joburg, that have that opportunity to do the same. So I like the idea of local, and I think, you know, that means that we could be accessing local farm goods more freely instead of going to the larger shopping centers. When I say that, we also do retail. So what happens to the larger shopping center? There's another question. I don't know. You know, what's the future of retail? So I think the future of retail, what we've seen immediately is that retail, the bigger centers are struggling, but the ones that are kind of community focused have a better chance, because what's happened is that the ones that rely on office workers are struggling a bit, but the ones that rely on where people live, because that hasn't changed, people are still living there. So that means that they've had a slightly better means of dealing with the current pandemic and the effects of it. So again, that kind of talks to local, and that's interesting.
With all the talk around digital transformation, smart cities, what do you think of the term smart city? What does that term mean to you?
Yeah, I think the commonly held view is that a smart city is a tech city. And I think we're still grappling with what that actually means. And there's no doubt that with the access to technology and more apps that are available, that tech will play a bigger role. But for me, the smart city is more about the connected city, the inclusive city, the accessible city, the one with good public transport, the one with good green space. And when we say good green space, I say, you know, a clean, safe green space, access, pedestrian friendly, cycle friendly. So I think that for me is more of the connected city. And from an inclusivity point of view, obviously the city that doesn't have urban sprawl, that connects people easier, that brings closer the divide between the rich and the poor, and therefore, you know, that everybody has access to all the facilities. And again, I'll come back to the issue of local, and I think, you know, maybe we should be revisiting the old idea of the community center, and the access to community health and community policing and community sports facilities that all our community sports facilities in Johannesburg are kind of falling apart. In fact, the city's trying to get rid of them because they can't manage them. And so maybe there needs to be a new model to have access to these. We did some interesting work 2-3 years ago for the Gauteng Department of Infrastructure Development, exactly around the issue of how do we bring the services to the communities without them having to travel forever, or having to travel to one service one day and another service another day. What happens if we put all of those services in one place? And we create smaller communities that are accessible by bicycle and by local commuter transport, or just within walking distance. You know, if you talk about the good urban design, the walkable city. So if all of those facilities in smaller natures, but well looked after and obviously well managed, then one has a better opportunity. So it can be a bigger city, but you know, it's actually broken down into communities or neighborhoods. And even if we look at that from an office design point of view, we also talk about neighborhoods. So we often use urban design references in solving our design challenges for big office blocks, because you also need to break them up into communities. So that's a good, I think, a good strategy. We need to kind of reinvent those. You know, in my youth, we had a good community center with a swimming pool and what have you, and it was safe and it was accessible, and we got on our bicycles and we went there, and the parents were happy that you were doing your own thing. So how do we bring some of that back? I'm interested in solving that challenge, and not just in Parkhurst where I live, but in all the communities.
I'm looking forward to you solving that for all of us. So as you've mentioned, for cities to benefit everyone, it needs to be inclusive. How do you think we move to more inclusive cities?
I think inclusivity obviously means access to facilities and services, and obviously being connected. So I think investment, can we please stop building roads? Can we please put our investment into public transport? And I think I'm currently busy with a very large urban design scheme in Johannesburg, and kind of our biggest stumbling block is the roads agency. And I wish our roads agencies, sorry, it's not just one agency, it's various agencies because of its location, but I wish the roads agency would become mobility agencies, which means they would then worry about public transport. They would then worry about cycling access. So being more connected. And unfortunately, I'm not a big fan of the BRT, because I think the BRT is a massive investment in infrastructure as opposed to mobility. And we're spending lots of money on upgrading and changing roads and actually creating divisions in roads because of the principle of it being in the median. Could we just buy buses, please, and create bus lanes without having to build infrastructure? So I think that a city needs to be connected and inclusive. And the moment it's connected, it'll be much more accessible and hence more inclusive. And again, that we mustn't create rich areas and poor areas. There needs to be legislation from an inclusivity point of view, which does mean that on certain areas, one needs to have a kind of different strategy of densification to allow affordable and social housing to be integrated into wealthier areas.
I've given you a magic wand previously. I'm going to take that. I'm going to give you a time machine, and I'm going to ask you, 20 years from now, what picture do you see for our cities? What does the new normal look like? What are the new jobs? What does the buildings look like? What key technologies do you think will emerge?
Sure. If I really had that, I think I'd be selling the answers and making lots of money. But so let's think about that. So from a technology point of view, there's no doubt that we're all going to become more and more tech savvy. I think the last 20 weeks have taught us all, including my 89-year-old father, to become much more tech savvy and accessible. And as a result, tech and apps are going to be much more part of our lives, which means we're going to know what's happening in our street. We're going to know when the bus is arriving. We're going to know all sorts of things. How many parking bays are available in building. I think buildings might start sharing their parking bays instead of holding onto them for themselves. So tech is going to definitely change our lives, or the way that we engage with our city. How different will the physical fabric of our city look? I can only hope that what we will see is fewer cars, that we will see more public transport, good quality, accessible, affordable public transport, that with an ideal actually ultimately of having free public transport would be ideal, and that there is access to good green space. I think there's an opportunity for lots of kind of empty lots to be turned into green space, but green spaces that are not looked after, that are not safe, are not, they aren't going to add much value to the quality of our lives. So I'm hoping we see more of that. I'm really hoping that in 20 years' time, I can sit here and have another conversation with you, and that our roads agencies have become mobility agencies, that we've changed the way that we look at accessibility. I think that would make a huge impact, that those that still drive cars will all be driving electric cars, and electricity not produced by fossil fuels, but by particularly for most of Africa, out of access to solar solutions. I'd like to see all our buildings have rooftop gardens, have urban agriculture in them, that we have good natural ventilation corridors in our cities and our suburbs, that there's fewer roads, that all the roads that are dual lane are now become single lane. Get rid of as much of the kind of hard stand as possible. And yeah, am I answering your question? I think I am. So yes, I suppose I have more hope than a prediction. I think that I would hope that we could see decent quality housing for everyone. Access to education, and again, access to good education that's close by. I do, however, think that there is this opportunity for the rural areas to kind of reinvent themselves. So we talk about smart cities, but I think there's a huge opportunity for little rural towns to reinvent themselves. And I think the lessons we've learned out of working from home, which I now prefer to call distributed work, in other words, not working at the office, is that working from a rural town means that if I'm only coming into the office once a week or twice a week, could I live further away? If I live further away, I would hope that I then have access to good public transport. So now, an hour commute in the car, could that be a 20-minute commute by train? So could we invest in our train infrastructure and roll that out even further? And in Gauteng, of course, invest in the Gautrain rollout even better. But make sure that there's good community transport that links into that. So I have a hope for the future. I think probably the biggest challenge in Africa is that our biggest cities have so much that needs to get solved, that we may need to spend more time looking at second-tier cities and third-tier cities. So that's not to say that we ignore the big cities, but that there are maybe better opportunities to solve many of these questions in the second and third-tier cities.
Finally, do you have, in these troubled times, especially for the architectural and design community, do you have any words of encouragement or words of wisdom that you can share?
Encouragement, keep fighting, hang on to the ropes, don't get knocked out of the ring. We have to somehow stay in the ring. It's the same message I gave when I got the SAPSA award. Is the industry's in trouble? We need to stay in the ring. Statistics I heard recently that I think a third of all architectural practices have closed down in the last 4 months. This is not good news, so that doesn't bode well for staying in the ring. That said, once an architect, I hope you always stay an architect, because even though you might not have your own practice, but maybe you can still find a way to contribute into the built environment, which means that, stay in touch, keep reading. There's so much information out there. In fact, there's so much information that it's impossible to get through. And of course, the words of encouragement for any architect or any architect that's busy studying or something like that: read and draw, because inspiration exists. It just needs to find us working. So we need to be working, and we need to be drawing, and we need to be reading, and continually finding solutions. And we don't need to find the big solutions. It's the kind of broken window syndrome. Find the little solution for the problem on your street. Think about it, write about it, draw about it, share it. And I think collaboration is a very interesting thing that's happening to a lot of us, that we all now need to be collaborating with more and more people that aren't necessarily the traditional consultants that we used to work with. So, talk to the graphic designer, engage with the filmmaker, engage with a psychologist, engage with a teacher. They're all going to have some sort of input. And I think our smart cities of the future need to, whilst it's easy to use tech to kind of leapfrog and think that you're making a massive contribution, we do need to be engaging with the community, so that the data, that they know that what data is being shared, and that they are happy why it's necessary, and in fact that they can contribute to what kind of data is being made available. So I think we have to remain hopeful. I think architecture in itself is a kind of positive enterprise. We're building is a very positive act, investing in the future. So we have to keep investing, and we have to keep investing in ourselves, but we must invest in the built environment in a sustainable way, and look after our environment. As we all know, our environment's in trouble. So I'd like to see some legislation that looks after the environment.